We don't need this. It's just a ruler track. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting my, I have my channel that I'm working on. I have a bunch of reference tracks, right? And so I'm using my own music on this, but like for you guys, I would recommend to, if you're making a track that's, full on or something, pick a top full on artist and use that as a reference track. If you're making night music or dark side or forest, pick a track that sounds, like what you want it to sound like and just use that as a reference. Again, you don't need to sound it exactly like that, but it'll be a good point for checking your metering, especially when you're trying to figure, you're learning. But and then what I do is I take one of my good ones and I just keep mastering all my other ones to that so that, even if it's not perfect, it's consistent. And yeah. So then what I'll do is I'll put some meters and stuff onto the master. So that way I can look and I can see the master channel, but also so if I'm, so what I'll leave is this one unsoloed and then the other one. So let's see. I can switch between them and then see everything, right? So I can be checking out. So wait, let me just turn down a little bit more because now we're doing, but exactly. So if I put all the scopes and stuff onto the individual channel, then you're just going to see it for that one channel. I want to see the same scopes across all of the different tracks. So I can just check out my reference tracks and that. And then you're also listening and you just, do that, switch back and forth and make sure they are in the right place. Okay. So for mastering, I would say especially when you're doing it for your guys yourself, there's a bunch of, if we were talking about how to get you to do like to professional mastering, there would be many stages. There's a lot of different types of things you can use. But for our purposes, we're not, to really master well, you also need your room to be treated better. You need to understand how your speakers sound, in reference to other speakers. And there's a lot of knowledge there and that takes time to gain. And so I think it's really worthwhile to get somebody to master your tracks. Personally, I pay if with the tracks that get released, everything on Sangoma goes through somebody, and so they eventually will pay for it. But for me, if the track's not going to come out for 6 months or who knows when it's going to come out, I'll just pay for Scorb to master it. It's not cheap, but that way everything in my set is all mastered. And when I'm playing out all the time, I mean, that's how I play out. So I want it mastered properly, not just on the CD for other people to play. But at the same time, I don't want to master the track before it's finished. So a lot of times I'll finish a track, get it ready to play, and I want to do a quick mastering to get it so that it's close enough to my actually mastered stuff that I can play it out in my set and it sounds pretty good. So that's what we're going to talk about. Not professional mastering, but a home mastering that will allow you to get it close enough to play with other properly mastered stuff. So there are a few the first thing that you're doing in which is the last stage in it, but it's the most important one, would be a limiter. And to be honest, you could only use the limiter and actually you wouldn't go so wrong, because the other thing to think about mastering your own music is, you just wrote it. So it's hard to be really objective about it. If you send it to somebody else, or even if you were listening to somebody else's music, you'd be like, oh, there's not enough bass, there's too much of this, there's too much of that, and fix it. But if it's your own track, well, you're going to think it's right because you just did it. And then if you do notice something wrong, well, it would be better to actually, since you have the project, to go back and fix it rather than try to like if you say, oh, that sound is, it's EQing or the percussion is not loud enough. You wouldn't want to just boost the percussion. Still super loud, guys. Sorry. You wouldn't just want to boost. Ooh, that's why it went all the way up. Sorry. -15, please. There we go. So if you see something wrong and the percussion's too loud or too low or whatever, you wouldn't want to just say put an EQ and pull this down or push that up. it's your music. Go back to the track, fix it, and then put it back in. So I highly suggest that, using your mastering process to catch the last things, but then don't overdo it. The mastering engineer that you send it to, they'll do that kind of stuff. But for our own purposes, it'd be easier to fix any things you notice in your mix and then put it back through, so that you could almost just do a very clean mix. Clean, as I mean, simple mastering. And even I heard there's this some, I don't know, Armin van Buren maybe, or somebody like that. He was talking about that when he was ready to play something out to test it before it's finished to make sure that it's good, he'll just throw this one on it, which is the UAD precision limiter. But it doesn't have to be this one. We can also, I want to pull up Pro L. It doesn't look like that, which is Fab Filters. And then if we want, we can also talk about, let's see, if we go into in Cubase, they have brick wall limiter and also just limiter. Let me just show what a limiter would look like. But so basically what a limiter is going to do, any of these, we can start with like the Pro L. You're going to give it gain, right? So you're going to be pushing the audio signal up, and then it's going to cut everything that goes over the threshold. So you're going to be, and this is where we want to talk about decibels versus RMS. So decibels is a measure of the peak loudness, so that at the loudest peak that you have at any given moment is going to be a decibel value. Then you have another thing called RMS, and RMS is the root mean square. And so this is it's the square root of the mean square. Basically what it does is it gives you a generalized and averaged mean. So this is your the average level. It's kind of like the body of the sound. If you think it's how much how much pressure is going to be there, and this is what you're really pushing up. We're going to be pushing the RMS, because the decibels at some point, the peaks are going to be hitting 0 or above, and anything above 0 is going to be squashed, and we are going to be pushing the RMS up underneath that. And so the more you push it, the more squashed it's going to be. And as we can just see, if we do this, as we go up, it's reducing the sound here. Oh, thanks, babe. Coffee delivery. And so it's going to be cutting it. And the difference in a compressor, it's going to be a bit smoother. This is going to literally allow nothing to go above it. And there are different modes for them, where, on some I have on the Oxford one, which is really great. They also make this that's not for UAD, this Sonox Oxford limiter. They have some things like safe mode and auto comp, which just deal with the way that deals with the very top. So sometimes you get a master track that still goes into the red, and so this safe mode will deal with that. This one also has a little pre-process and an enhanced curve, which is very nice. But the general thing is basically the same, that you are going to be pushing the gain of the track up, and it's going to be limiting what's there. And so, to be honest, for most practical purposes, this is what I just do to my tracks when I want to play it out. Because as I said, if I'm applying, why put an EQ on there when I could just fix it in the track? Why put, some other multi-band compressor? While those things all can be good, again, I'm listening to the sound on the same speakers that I wrote it on, and so it's going to be difficult for me really to add much to it in that process. So for my own purposes, you can just put a limiter on there, and the limiter will do a good job. And but we'll go through also some of the other things just so you can see what happens. So for example, types of other things you could use would be a multiband. This one is from Universal Audio. It's part of their mastering series. But again, there are many things like this. There are a lot, and also, wait, let me pull this up. What the fuck is it called? Oh, right, ozone. So let's talk about ozone. Oh, I didn't install it again. Anyways, I I forgot to. It's not here. Not sure why. I have the isotope their meter thing, which is also very good. Because the other thing we can talk about is LUFS, right? LUFS. So here, let's show what happens on. Let's show what happens when we just put this. So we're going to use this one. Sorry, Windows here. This as a meter, and we'll go to our thing and just push it up on the Pro L. So we have two things. We have levels here, and so what you can see is the top line is going to be the peak, and then we are also going to have the RMS, right? And then we have LUFS. And so there are three different ways. And so basically the way that the difference between RMS is going to be individually, like at that moment it's hitting this RMS level. The LUFS is going to be another over a period of time. It's going to be, so here you see momentary max LUFS, which will show us, and then the integrated LUFS it's going to be over time. So you can see, and so this will just be give you, it's two different types of ways of monitoring it, and you want to kind of think about them both. Usually you don't want your LUFS to go over -8, and same thing with your RMS. For other musics, it can be different. Again, here there's what's called the loudness wars, where everybody's been pushing the RMS and the LUFS up, but there's a point where it's just going to sound worse. If you ever listen to something like progressive house, they're going to be hitting, it's going to be much more, they're going to have higher RMS and everything, but that's because it's a different music and they have less stuff going on. If it were rock and roll, they would have a bigger dynamic range, which would mean a lower like -14 decibels for the RMS. So anyways, there's rules. There's also, if we look here, I have this precision limiter, which you can see there are different types of monitoring. If I turn it on, this one is cool because it is a limiter, so we can limit it here. But one of the reasons I also like it is because we have different modes. So there's these K modes, which are basically standardized to different ranges. So it'll put 0 as is actually -20. K12 would be 12 as the top of the bar, -12, and K14 would be 14 as the top. So that way the top of the meter is right. And so basically K20 was for like movies and stuff. K14 was generally for music, rock and roll. K12 is for broadcast, like radio and stuff like this. But again, that's a bit outdated, but it's still a good, I mean, our music, we go above that. So we would want like a K9, but they don't make that. So anyways, but you could see if you're going above then the 0 point, then you would know. So we could also see it in just peak and RMS, and in here we have a zoom option so you can see it. So if I could play again, this is our peaks and this is the RMS. So this is a good limiter, but at the same time, you guys don't need that. Like you talked, constant loud masters. Yes, exactly. So this is the thing. It's also, if you ever listen to if you're watching TV and you're watching a movie or something, and then a commercial comes on, you're like, what the fuck? It's so loud. That's because they have compressed the shit or limited the shit out of that advertisement so that it's like really fucking loud. And yeah, there's been this trend that everybody was trying to make their mastering louder. So, but again, it's apparent loudness. There's a difference between actual volume loudness and apparent loudness. So something seems louder, but it's not actually louder. There's a maximum range. Also, loudness is determined by your speakers. If you turn your speakers down, it's quieter, right? So it's not actually a measure of how loud it is. It's a measure of how loud it seems, right? And so if you just push stuff up together, it's going to seem louder, but also you're going to lose the dynamic range. And for our music, dynamic range is very important. Also, the constant loudness is important. So you have to get a balance of that. So let's just look here at we're not going to use the precision one because I want to show you guys stuff. So this is Isotope Insight, and then just the Pro L. So here we're getting our So we have, yeah, you can see here, this is the range, and then this is the top there. So average, and if we push it up, now we've got it that you see the top is hitting is at 0 or above, right? Because this is, we need to turn on, they need a safe mode or something here, but it's getting all the way to the top. And then this is going to be showing us our RMS levels down here. This, as you can see, we have the momentary LUFS and then the integrated LUFS. And so the integrated LUFS is a great way to do it because it's going to take your sound and over a few seconds and as everything's adding up and give you a nice balanced one. So this is the one that you don't really want to go above 8, -8. But again, an 8, -9, somewhere in this range is where you want to be. So that's already getting us into the levels we want. Now what I would do is just to show you to level it out, what we're going to do is just, I want to A/B it against some other tracks that I already have mastered. So let's listen. Oh, and actually, sorry, I was saying with the RMS, you don't really want to go above -8. With the integrated LUFS, you could go up as high as like -7.5, -7. It depends also, again, some tracks, if they have more mid-range and stuff, you'll see the balance of RMS to LUFS is different than something that is more open. And so these are not rules as much as guidelines. So those are kind of a different example because as you can hear, the bass in this phase change one is sounds totally different, and this one's sitting a lot lower. So a little bit of a hard comparison, and maybe we can try a different one. So as you can see, those tracks sound different, but our levels are staying the same basically between them. And so that is giving us, that means that we're in close range and their levels are about right where we want them to be. If we did it like this, and we hear this, and we're down here, and also if you just click this, it resets. So obviously this is gonna be too quiet. So we're still getting it louder when we do into the other one. So I would say I need a little more. So somewhere around there would be good. And again, one other thing I'll mention is that in my masters, when I usually can't, thanks guys. Yeah, more coming soon. But when I do my own mastering also, I can't quite get it as loud and as loud as say Scorb does without compressing it a bit too much. So usually I'll just leave it a little bit lower, you know, I won't squash it. If mine sounds and like the lufts are a little bit lower, that's fine, because then on the mixer, I'll just be aware and I might gain it up. I just find that if I push too hard and I try to exactly match the mastering, then you might squash it too much. And it would be a little better to have a little more dynamic range and then gain it up if you need to while you're playing your set than to over squash it. And again, the professional mastering engineers are going to have better equipment and everything, so they'll be able to get a cleaner result with more pumping. But you're right, so you don't necessarily need to, you know, don't try to exactly match whatever your track is. Get close to it and a little under it, just because, you know, you're never going to be able to do as good as the professional master did on your own system. So now just want to show you a couple of the other types of things that I would use if I was doing some mastering for somebody else, or if I decided I wanted to tweak things a bit more and have some more control. So there's a few different things you can use. As I said, this precision multiband, this one I really like. This is pretty cool because, and there are others that do this. I got a UAD precision mastering series when I first got my UAD, and it came with a couple basic ones. And the great thing about this is it is multi-band, but it has the option to be a compressor, expander, and gate. So you can choose different modes. So you can either expand or compress. And so this is nice because sometimes you might want to expand a bit, say the high frequencies, but compress something else. So if I hit this one, you can see that it has 3 types of modes here. And so I can put this one if I wanted to compress it, and let me turn it on. So now you can see we're compressing the low frequencies a little bit. And you don't really want this, you don't really want to compress when the kick is hitting, but this could be useful if there's something that's stepping onto the kick a little bit, you know? So, and then you can see it's going down for compression. And this one is expanding. So here I have it on the expander. And if we listen to the high frequencies, you can also mute, enable, and everything, or solo. So we can just hear different parts of it. And tools like this can be really useful to hear and to just change things. And so sometimes when I'm doing a little mastering for somebody else, if the percussion is too low, you can expand it a little bit. If you have some mid-range stuff that's hitting too much, you can compress it. The other thing to do is if, say, you wanted to, you know, boost part of the track and not part, you know, like the high frequencies, you wouldn't want to put a parametric EQ on the entire mix because it's just going to affect the frequencies next to what you're doing. So what you can, this is a good way also, if you just say, I need a little bit more mids, you could just bring it up with a multi-band, because the way that these crossovers are going to work is just make it a little bit cleaner. And so you won't affect the frequencies down here when you're boosting it here. So as you can see, we can boost the frequencies if we wanted here, and it's just going to be a little bit more subtle and a little bit more smooth. So multi-band compression and stuff like this can be a useful tool. Then just to show you some things that people use that are going to give you a better result is, this is an EQ that I would use. There's special mastering EQ. They also make a normal non-mastering version, but this is called the Manley Massive Passive. It's based on a hardware thing that is, you know, renowned for mastering. And so this one, basically, it's, you can either make it stereo, so each side is if I move this, it's moving on both sides. Basically, you just have a couple points that you choose the bandwidth here, the frequency, how, if again, oh sorry, this is the frequency, the bottom, and so you choose the place where it is. You have low pass and high pass here, mastering ones if you want. So if you needed a low pass or high pass, these would be very good ways to do it. And then you have individual ones, and as you can see, they're different. They're shelves, or if it's a shelf, right, then it would look like that, and just different. This is the bandwidth, or the Q, the frequency. Sorry, the resonance. So again, at the bottom, you would want to be using sharper ones. Up here, you'd want to use smaller, wider ones. But this can be a good way if you wanted to boost or cut. Sometimes if we need a little more hi-hat, and you could be boosting. So you can hear more air, more percussion up there. But this kind of tool can be very good if you want to tweak your stuff a little bit. And it's something that I would use when I'm doing mastering for other people. The next thing that I would use is, so to talk about something else is that so again, for our own purposes, if I'm just mastering the track to play out on the weekend, I might just do the limiter, you know, because again, I wrote the track, what am I going to do? But just to see what people are really doing, there's another important thing to mastering, which is called gain staging. And so this can help you to basically, instead of putting the limiter, not that one, instead of putting the limiter and having it go up 12 decibels or something like that, you would get each stage of the way, you would be slowly boosting the volume. So here in this, I could put that in, and I could put the gain up a little bit to give one decibel coming out of this. Then I could use what this is called the Shadow Hills Mastering Compressor. It's a dual compressor, so I'm going to use it in stereo mode, but you could have it in mono. Cool thing about this one is it has two different types of circuits. One is an optical and one is a discrete. And this is just, this is just algorithms in the computer, but in the actual box, this is modeled on their different types of circuits, and discrete is using discrete electronics, optical is using an optical circuit. So they both have slightly different results. So what we can do here, though, that this is really useful because it'll apply subtle compression before we go to the limiter. So that can give us a little bit of shaping the sound and help also, as we do it, gain stage our way up. So I have the threshold here and then the gain. So if we turn this on, I'm getting a little bit of here, and then what I can do is I can give it some gain, which will then go into the next one, and then we could gain it up here if we need to. So much. And one thing here, when you're doing in mastering compression, you want long attack times. You see here, the attack time is on 30 because basically you don't want to be squashing any of the peaks and stuff. You want to be subtly pushing it up, right? So you want long attack time on this, which is what we can choose here on the discrete. Also, the lower the ratio is, the more transparent it's going to be. So if you just want it to be very, very subtle and use it as a boost, you could put the ratio down to 1.2. So it's going to be very small. Or you can put it a bit higher, 2, 3. Wouldn't want to go all the way. You want to keep it usually on the lower end. But the most important thing is that the attack is going to be long on any mastering compression. But again, as you can see now, if we do this and we look at our levels here, when we put this on, we're gaining some volume already. So now when we go to our fab filter, we don't need to go up to 10 anymore. We could probably do somewhere around 8. I don't really need to apply. You don't need to put the gain on the limiter up very much. Some people would even do it so by the time it's gotten to the limiter, it's all the way up there and it's just catching the peaks and stuff. But this is a good tool because then you're going to shape it as it goes up and each step of the way. So it's going to be more transparent if you don't have giant boosts like this. So that's just something to know. Again, it's less important when we're doing our own home mastering, but just to know the way that the people who are professionally mastering it, they're going to be doing that, stepping the gain up with each step of the way. Anyways, and then let me just show you so you can see that what this limiter does. Well, here we can, there's one other tool here. This is called a maximizer, and it looks just like the other one. But what this is going to do is it's basically it's got a shape here and a mix, and it's going to be shaping the sound and adding. If you look at it, it adds little ridges almost to the waveform, right? And so this is basically in the analog world, when you say something's warmer, this is kind of what it's doing. And this obviously is not analog, and you don't want to do a lot of this because it will really change the sound, but very subtly this can make it sound a little bit brighter, a little bit more full. And the one reason I really love this Oxford EQ or limiter from UAD, but also you can get this one by it, not through the Oxford plugins are available in a bunch of different ones, but it has this enhanced curve. So first, if we just listen to the master thing, so we're seeing the level here and the amount of gain reduction here. Now we're going to listen what happens when I push this enhanced curve up. So this is going to be doing a very similar thing to the maximizer, which is just enhancing the sound by overlaying it with something that's going to then just make it a little, and you'll just hear if you listen carefully while we do this. So as you can see, it says here, if we hover over it, dynamic enhancement, and it's, you know, affecting each individual sample. So that's down. Now, the key to here is, as you can see, it's not changing the LUFS very much because you're not actually pushing it anymore. You're not increasing the range, but you can hear that it sounds fuller, right? It sounds more dynamic, or more, not dynamic, but more, it sounds fuller. It sounds like you squashed it more, brighter, exactly everything. And so this is a really useful tool. And so some of these, if they have the enhance built in, then it's great. And I would not use a maximizer. If they don't have it, we can try it with the maximizer here, which was this one. You would put it, and so this one, yeah, anyways, if we just listen to the shape, and then I'll move the mix up. Oh. So that's down. And you can see it sounds fuller and brighter. And again, you don't want to do this all the way. On the maximizer, I use it. There's, you know, the preset there says, is it on? Because it's just really subtle. Because if you do this too much, especially if it's after the limiter, then, you know, you're going to be pushing, you're going to be changing it, and then you also might get peaks above it. But this is a useful tool so that you can make it sound more full, sound brighter, without over squashing it, because you don't want to over squash your music. And then, because then what's going to happen is people think that you can push it up and it'll just be louder and louder, but there's a point where you won't be any louder. You're actually just going to be hitting the compressor, and it's going to duck the sound more, and so it'll sound like it was depressed. You know, you hear these little bounce, and that just means the music was over limited, over compressed. And so you just want to watch out for that, and that's why these enhance things are really great. But again, you know, even the big boys, the pros, a lot of times will just put the limiter on, and Pro L is great. I mean, basically any clean limiter you have is going to be great. And, you know, just put it on, take a reference track and get it to, you know, approximately the right level, and, you know, test it out. Because again, as I said, if you're mastering your own music, it's hard to make the appropriate changes because you wrote it. Let's see here. Okay, so that is the basics of mastering. Again, the purpose of this is for, you know, you make something and you want to compare it to something else. You want to play it out. You want to play it. But I still recommend, you know, eventually when you're ready, you know, send a track to a professional mastering engineer and pay them to do it. And then you can compare that to your own. And then also, if you get one mastered, then you can use that track as your reference track when you're doing your own mastering rather than somebody else's music, because of course it's always going to be closer. But for the moment, you guys, I would, you know, and also if you look at the waveform with the analyzers, or not, I mean, look at the waveform, but also look at the spectrum, the frequency analyzer, you know, you can compare to your favorite music, you know. So if you really see that, you know, your favorite music is somebody, you know, your favorite artist has their percussion is much higher than yours, well, then you'll be able to see that clearly and you can make those corrections. But again, I'd go back into the project and fix it that way.